He hadn't heard real footsteps in 3 winters. Not ones that moved with breath and hesitation. The kind that stopped just short of courage. Wyatt Finch leaned against the doorway of his father's abandoned barn, chewing the inside of his cheek, watching the distant shimmer along the cattle trail. 5 figures. 5 girls. Moving slow and strange, as if the ground hurt. As if their bones were remembering what it meant to hope. They were too far off to call to, too close to ignore. Each step they took across the dry ridge felt like a decision. He didn't move. Just listened. The hush of dust. The soft clatter of rocks under worn boots. One of the girls stumbled, caught by another's hand. They reached the split rail fence just as the sun cracked open behind them, casting their shadows long across his pasture. And then they knelt. All 5. No words. Just dropped like a church prayer had struck them mid-sentence. Wyatt's breath tightened in his throat. One girl bowed her head. Another looked up, eyes searching for something. Mercy or maybe the man she thought he might be. The tallest, with dark hair braided in 3s, placed her hand over the smallest one's back like a mother shielding a child. Their dresses were road-stained and wind-shredded, patched in places with flower sackcloth and old curtain lace. They weren't lost. They had chosen this. Wyatt stepped forward once, then stopped. His boots crunched the earth, and 5 heads jerked up like deer in a clearing. No one rose. The wind brushed the hem of their skirts against their knees like ghosts moving through memory. "What are you doing?" he asked, not sharp, not soft. The oldest lifted her chin. Her voice came low, shaped like someone who'd had to speak for others before. "Begging, sir." Wyatt blinked. "For what?" "Not money. Not your name." She hesitated. "Just shelter. 1 night. Maybe 2. Then we'll be gone." The sun had climbed just enough to burn the frost off the barn's tin roof. Wyatt's horse neighed in the background, restless, watching from the pen. A hawk circled overhead once, twice, then veered west toward the bluff. "Where's your wagon?" he asked. "Burned." "Where's your men?" A pause. "Buried." That was the end of it. Wyatt rubbed the back of his neck. He didn't want 5 women on his land. Didn't want their story, their trouble, or whatever price had chased them here. But he'd once watched a man ignore a woman's knock in winter. She died on his porch. Wyatt buried her himself, and never forgot the sound of her fist on that wood. He turned. "If you don't mind mice and hay, you can sleep in the loft." He didn't wait to see if they followed. Inside, he threw a few logs into the stove but didn't light it. Left a half loaf of cornbread on the kitchen counter with a knife beside it. Then walked back out, let the barn doors creak open on their own. One by one, they entered. The smallest girl stopped before passing him, her gaze flicking to his hands, then back to his eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. He gave a nod he didn't mean. That night, Wyatt lay awake with a rifle across his chest. Not because he feared the girls, but because he feared what the world would make of them being here. The next morning, town knew. It always did. Wyatt rode into Harrow Creek just after sunrise for nails and flour. The postmaster's wife stared a little too long. The saloon boy tipped his hat with a grin that wasn't friendly. Outside the hardware store, Sheriff Amos leaned against the rail post, thumbs tucked in his vest, and said, "Heard you've got company up at the Finch place." Wyatt didn't respond. 5 girls, wasn't it? The sheriff continued. Strange that, all kneeling like it was a church revival. Folks are talking. Wyatt handed 2 coins to the clerk without looking away. Town's got laws, Wyatt. Got a pastor too. You think this'll stay quiet? You're wrong. Wyatt slung the flour bag over his shoulder. You finished? Amos chewed on a toothpick. Not yet. I'll be up tomorrow to ask some questions. Bring questions, Wyatt said. But bring them honest. He rode out. Back at the ranch, the girls were hanging sheets on a line Wyatt hadn't noticed was strung. One of them, red-haired, youngest by the look of her, was barefoot and singing low, off-key. Another was sweeping the porch with a pine branch tied with twine. The tallest, the one who'd spoken first, stood in the doorway, arms folded, watching him. "We didn't touch your tools," she said. "I didn't say you did." She didn't smile. "We just thought it'd be fair to work." Wyatt nodded. "You got names?" She hesitated. "First names." "That'll do." She looked to the others before answering. "I'm Calla. That's Mercy, Ivy, Junie, and Delilah." He said nothing. Junie, the red-haired one, approached him, arms full of kindling. "Your barn smells like honey. Is that normal?" "No. I like it anyway." He watched her walk back, barefoot through the frost without flinching. Tougher than she looked. Wyatt hauled a bucket to the trough, filled it with cold water from the pump. When he passed Mercy, he noticed the limp. She kept her eyes down, but her hands were smoothing the wood of a broken chair rail like she meant to fix it. That night, as the wind picked up and the roof sighed with cold, Wyatt heard quiet laughter from the barn. Not loud. Just enough to hurt a man who hadn't heard it in too long. The next morning, a letter was nailed to his fence post. No signature. "This town don't want whores on our edge. Send them on or we will." Wyatt burned the note without blinking. But that evening, he found Ivy crying in the hay, clutching a tattered ribbon. He didn't ask. Just handed her his coat, sat near, and let silence say what words couldn't. That was the first time one of them didn't call him sir. She called him Wyatt. The morning after that, he woke to the smell of biscuits, burned at the bottom, sweet on top. Calla stood by the stove, apron dusty, face unreadable. "We used what was left," she said. He nodded once, sat, and ate every bite. Outside, the frost began to melt. But on the ridge, just past where the sky touched the town, a figure on horseback watched. And turned back toward Harrow Creek. The morning began with frost melting like spilled milk over the fence rails, turning dust to mud in slow, stubborn streaks. Wyatt Finch watched from the porch, arms folded, boots wet at the ankles. The 5 girls were already awake, kneeling in the dirt with sleeves rolled and fingers blackened by the soot of their work. No one had asked them to fix the corral gate, but there they were, like they'd lived here all their lives and owed this land a debt they were born with. He said nothing. They said nothing back. The stillness between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was survival. A silence shaped like bruises healed over, words held back not from fear, but from dignity. Junie, the youngest, glanced up first. She squinted into the pale light like she was still unsure if the man watching would stay or vanish like the others. "Mr. Finch," she called, "do your chickens always lay eggs like they're hiding treasure?" Wyatt raised one brow. Ivy almost stepped on 2 in the hay pile. They were warm. She smiled wide, like it was a small miracle. It was. "I don't feed 'em much," he said. "Guess they're desperate." Junie snorted, dusted her hands, and skipped over to where Ivy stood by the barn. Ivy, taller and paler, was smoothing out a torn apron and humming under her breath. The tune had no words. It sounded like the wind trying to remember an old hymn. Calla emerged last, hair tied tight, her face unreadable. She walked like a woman who'd been watched too long by men who thought looking was a right. But her spine stayed straight, and her eyes met Wyatt's without flinching. "We fixed the latch," she said. "It should hold another winter." Wyatt stepped off the porch, boots sinking into the thawing mud. "That why you came here? To play carpenter?" Calla shrugged. "We came because there wasn't anywhere else. But now we're here. We figure we might as well matter." He didn't answer. Not because he didn't care, but because the words caught in places where rust lived. Inside the house, the kitchen smelled like burnt coffee and something warm. Delilah, broad-shouldered and freckled, was tending a pot with a wooden spoon like it was a weapon. She glanced up and wiped her hands on her skirt. "You didn't have flour, so we're using cornmeal," she said. "Ivy found sage in the back field. Smells like desert rain." He pulled out a chair. "What are you?" She blinked. "What do you mean?" "All of you. You're not sisters. You don't talk like strangers. And you sure don't belong to each other by name." Delilah stirred once more. The spoon clicked the side of the pot. Names don't always come from paper. We gave each other what we needed. Ivy needed quiet. Junie needed to be seen. Mercy. She trailed off. She needed a place where no one asked what happened to her leg. Wyatt looked over his shoulder toward the barn. She's out there with a crow on her arm, Delilah added softly. Feeds it oats. Named it Samuel. He stood. You've got 3 days left. After that, folks will start doing more than gossiping. She nodded. We know. But none of them packed. That night, the girls took turns washing their hair under the pump, whispering and laughing like water itself was a secret. Wyatt lit a lantern in the barn so they wouldn't have to scrub in the dark. He stayed in the shadows, pretending to fix the tack. But his eyes never left them. Calla dried her hair by the fire. She didn't laugh. Just stared at the flame like it owed her answers. Wyatt sat across from her and let the quiet stretch long between them. You gonna ask us where we came from? She finally said. No. Why? Because if it mattered, you would have told me already. Calla tilted her head slightly. That surprised her. We came from the same place a lot of women do. Some of us sold, some of us borrowed too much hope from the wrong hands. But we met each other on the trail. Lost. Half-starved. It wasn't dramatic. Just enough was enough. He stared into the fire. That's usually when people start walking. She smiled, but there was no joy in it. Only if they've got somewhere to go. The wind picked up around midnight. It moaned through the gaps in the barn wood and rattled the windows like a warning. Wyatt couldn't sleep. Neither could Mercy. He found her outside, sitting under the old sycamore with the crow, Samuel, nestled against her shoulder. Her legs stretched out stiff, toes twitching like they were waiting to be free of something. You should be in the barn, he said. She didn't look up. Can't sleep when it sounds like the world's cracking open. Wyatt leaned against the tree beside her. Storms'll pass. She touched the bird's beak. So do people. The words landed heavy. He wanted to ask who'd hurt her, what made her flinch when doors closed too loud. But she wasn't ready. And maybe he wasn't either. The next morning, a boy rode up from town. 17, maybe. Hat too big, shoulders too thin. He brought a sack of flour and a folded piece of muslin. From my ma, he muttered. She said you're doing something good. Even if no one says it out loud. He rode off without asking for payment. Junie danced with the sack like it was gold. Delilah made cornbread that didn't burn. For a breath, it felt like hope. But then came the voice. Late afternoon. Just as the sun began tilting westward and the barn cast its long shadow across the field. A man on horseback. Dark coat, brown teeth, eyes mean and narrow. Wyatt Finch, he hollered. Wyatt stepped outside, shotgun resting behind the door. You letting filth hole up in your barn now? The girls froze on the porch. You think we don't know what kind of girls show up in packs, half-dressed and full of stories? I knew Mercy's face from Denton County. Saw Delilah once in Stockton. She used to sing for coins, until she started taking more than coins. Wyatt's jaw tightened. You've said enough. I ain't even started. He turned to the girls. You think hiding here makes you clean? You're still what you were. You'll always be what you were. That was when Ivy stepped forward. Not Wyatt. Not Calla. Ivy. She walked barefoot through the mud, dress hem soaked, hair loose and tangled. She stopped 5 feet from the rider and stared up at him like he wasn't even there. I used to think men like you had power, she said, quiet and calm. Turns out you're just loud. The man's sneer faltered. You should go, she added. He spat into the dirt. But something in her voice, her stillness, unnerved him. He kicked his horse and turned. As he rode off, Wyatt turned to the girls. You can stay. Calla blinked. Even if the town turns? Wyatt's voice didn't waver. They'll have to turn past me. And somewhere, behind the barn, a bell clanged once. Not from a chapel, but from the wind hitting the old dinner bell Wyatt's mother used to call him home. None of them spoke, but they all heard it. And that night, for the first time, they ate together. At the same table. No, sir. No, ma'am. Just names. Whispered in the dust. Spoken like truth. The frost had lifted, but the ground still carried the memory of cold. That morning, Wyatt handed each girl a pair of gloves. Too big for Junie, too stiff for Calla, but none of them complained. They understood what it meant when he pointed toward the splintered fence line and dropped a bag of nails at their feet. No speech. No orders. Just shared labor in place of trust. They worked in rhythm, like the sound of hammer to wood could quiet the doubts whispering behind every smile. Calla hauled lumber. Delilah measured posts with a string of braided twine. Mercy steadied with her good leg braced like a root. Junie, wild and curious, turned hammer swings into a game, counting out loud, then missing the nail entirely and laughing at her own clumsiness. Ivy didn't swing at all. She sketched. She sat on a crate with a pencil nub and tattered paper, watching the others, drawing quick lines like she was trying to capture not their faces but their belonging. Wyatt repaired the northern corner alone, but his eyes drifted often, drawn by the harmony that didn't belong to him, but somehow stitched itself into his day anyway. At noon, they drank water from the tin bucket and passed around hard biscuits wrapped in cloth. Calla sat beside Wyatt for the first time, not across from him, not behind him. Beside. Close enough for him to smell the cedar in her hair, feel the scrape of her elbow when she leaned forward and said, "We're making it yours again." He shook his head. "It was never mine. Just left in my name." She tilted her chin, eyes flicking across the field. "Still needs someone to care for it. Care's different than ownership." "And still heavier," she said, standing before he could answer. By late afternoon, the wind picked up, warm, brushing the skin like a whisper. Dust lifted in little spirals near the ridge, where broken boards leaned like crooked teeth. Delilah climbed into the wagon bed to pull down old rails. Her sleeves rolled to the elbow, freckles bared, sweat darkening her neckline. She grunted as she dragged each post, her hands red from effort. Wyatt approached her with a quiet respect, reaching for the heavier beam. "You don't have to." "I know," she cut in. "But you'd help me anyway." He nodded once. Delilah eyed him as he bent to lift. "Most men help to be owed something. You're hard to read." He looked at her. "Then don't." But his voice held no sharpness, just fatigue. She half smiled. "You and Calla talk in riddles. She and I don't talk much at all. You both say a lot without saying it." They moved the last beam together and set it by the gate. Neither spoke again, but something had passed between them, a kind of pact born of silence. By sundown, Mercy was limping more than usual. Her face pale, jaw clenched tight. Wyatt noticed first. He crouched beside her near the barn where she leaned against a barrel, breathing slow through her nose. "You all right?" She didn't answer. Just nodded. "You don't have to prove anything," he added. "I'm not proving," she whispered. "I'm remembering how to stand." He paused. "That leg. What happened?" A long silence. Then, "He tied me to a post. Said he'd teach me obedience." Wyatt looked away. "I was 16, she continued, voice barely above wind. "Stayed quiet long enough, but I ran. Lost the limp to the cold. The rest came from the fall." He reached into his coat and pulled out a pocket knife. Nothing sharp anymore, just worn steel. He handed it to her. "My father gave me this when I was 12. Told me to carry it like a backbone." She turned it over in her palm. "You're welcome to keep it," he said. "I won't." She looked up at him. "But I'll hold it for now." That night, a letter arrived. No rider, no knock. Just a folded page wedged into the doorframe. It smelled of pipe smoke and meat grease. The message was short. "You were warned. We'll ride at moonrise. Clean your porch." Wyatt folded the page and tossed it into the stove without a word. Calla stood behind him in the glow. "We can leave." "You could have left already. This is your home." "It's barely mine." "It's becoming ours," she said, her voice barely steady. He turned, catching her eyes for the first time that day. "You'd fight for that?" Her gaze didn't waver. "I've fought for less. And bled more." The next morning, Wyatt found Ivy painting a sign. Not a fancy one, just a board from the fence with white letters crooked and bold. Finch Ranch. He looked at it for a long time, then walked away without speaking. But the girls saw the difference in his gait. He moved with decision now, not doubt. Junie followed him to the well later, her hands in her pockets, voice small. "Did you ever have siblings?" He shook his head. "Not really." She nodded. "We pretend we are. The 5 of us. Sometimes it helps." Wyatt looked at her sideways. "You all got out together?" "Calla started it," she said. "We met at a halfway place in Elk Hollow. Delilah worked the kitchen. Ivy drew sketches for food. Mercy, she barely spoke, but she had that crow. People thought it was cursed. We didn't. And you. I just followed whoever made me feel safe. And now, I'm still following. But this time, the path feels solid." The sound of hooves broke the moment. 3 riders appeared over the ridge. Not slow. Not threatening yet, but deliberate. One of them wore a preacher's coat. The other 2 had rifles. Calla stepped onto the porch. Wyatt stepped beside her. The riders stopped 20 feet out. "You were told," the preacher said. "This land's decent folks' ground. We don't take kindly to women of a certain trade squatting and making it look respectable." Calla didn't flinch. "We never asked to be seen respectable. Just left alone." "You won't be," the preacher said. "Not if you make us choose." Wyatt took 1 step forward. "This land's been quiet for years," he said, voice low but clear. "Now it's alive. And I'd like it to stay that way." The man to the right, a rancher with a toothpick in his mouth, snorted. "You siding with them?" Wyatt raised his hand. "I'm saying this is my land, and I've made peace with who's standing on it." The rancher spat, lifted his rifle an inch from the saddle. "Don't," Wyatt said simply. And somehow, it was enough. The preacher gave a final glare. "You'll see, Finch. The town's mercy doesn't stretch this far. 1 fence post at a time won't save you." They turned and rode off. But the silence they left behind was not fearful. It was resolved. That evening, Calla hammered the last board onto the fence. She didn't ask for help. Wyatt watched her from the porch, coffee in hand. When she finished, she stood tall, sweat streaking her neck, hands shaking from the strain. "Fence's done," she said. Wyatt nodded. "You still want us gone?" He looked at her, long and slow. "No." And from inside the barn, Mercy rang the old bell 3 times, once for each rider who wouldn't return that night. Smoke came before the fire. A thin line of it, rising from behind the ridge like someone whispering too close to the sky. Junie was the first to see it, barefoot again, standing on the porch rail, hair wild from the wind. "Something's burning," she said, voice thin. Wyatt looked up from the trough where he'd been washing his hands. The girls gathered behind Junie, faces turned east. It wasn't a kitchen fire, or a lightning strike. The smoke curled in slow, deliberate spirals. Controlled. Lit by a steady hand. "Ivy," Wyatt called, "check the barn. Delilah, bring the rifles." Quiet. No one asked questions. Calla didn't blink. She was already moving, tightening Mercy's boots, tucking Junie behind the doorframe. She didn't speak, but her calm steadied the others like fence posts in hard soil. Wyatt grabbed his coat and slung his father's shotgun over his shoulder. His jaw was tight, and his walk had purpose. There was no fear, just the cold knowing of what men do when they think no one will stop them. When he crested the ridge, the scene revealed itself. Not his barn. Not yet. It was an old lean-to, abandoned for years, now burning in a steady blaze. 3 men stood nearby, faces glowing with firelight, watching the wind carry the smoke westward toward his land. One of them, tall, sharp-cheeked, held a stick in the flame like a brand. They didn't see Wyatt until he was 20 feet off. "Evening," he said. The one with the stick turned, startled. It was the rancher with the toothpick from 2 days before. The preacher's friend. "Finch," he said, voice too casual. "Didn't expect you. Looks like you weren't expecting much." The man grinned, tooth crooked. "Just a reminder. Smoke travels. So do stories." Wyatt didn't raise his weapon. He didn't need to. "They're not yours to threaten," he said. "They're not yours to keep." The other 2 stepped forward slightly. One young, one older, both wearing expressions that said they'd crossed lines before. "And liked it." "You burn another inch toward my land," Wyatt said, "and I'll put you in the ground where that fire dies." The youngest shifted, hand twitching near his coat. But the leader raised a hand. Not in peace, just restraint. The kind a snake uses before it strikes. "We'll be back," the man said. "When there's no smoke, no wind, just consequence." Wyatt watched them ride off, but he didn't breathe until the flames had turned the lean-to to ash. That night, he didn't sleep. None of them did. Inside the ranch house, they sat in a circle. No food, no fire. Just the quiet of people who knew something had changed. "We leave now," Mercy said, breaking the silence. "They win." "They already think we're shadows," Ivy added. "Might as well prove we're still standing." Delilah rested her hand on the rifle beside her. "I say we light the stove and fix biscuits. They ride up here. Let 'em smell what survival tastes like." Junie giggled, soft and sharp. "Burned biscuits again?" "I'll burn a bullet into one if it helps," Delilah muttered. Calla looked to Wyatt. Not for permission. For truth. He stood near the door, staring at the latch like it might fall apart. Then he turned. "They won't stop unless they're made to." Junie's voice was soft. "You mean with guns?" "No," Wyatt said. "With presence." They didn't understand at first. But the next morning, they would. At dawn, Wyatt saddled his horse and tied a second one behind it. He wore his best shirt, still sun-faded and frayed at the cuffs, but cleaner than the rest. Ivy wrapped a scarf around his neck like a quiet prayer. He let her. "I'm going to town," he said. Calla frowned. "Alone?" "No." She stepped forward. "Then take me." He didn't hesitate. The ride into Harrow Creek was slow and silent. Snow still lived in the shade along the gulch, but the sun had begun to rise with authority. The town didn't look different, but it felt it. Heads turned. Doors half closed. A dog barked and was silenced. Wyatt stopped outside the general store. Calla stepped down, skirts dragging in the dust. She didn't look at anyone. She didn't need to. Word spread fast. By the time Wyatt stepped into the sheriff's office, Amos was already rising from his desk. "Whatever this is," he began. Wyatt dropped a burned stick onto the desk. The end still smelled of pine and ash. "They started a fire," Wyatt said. "East Ridge. Last night." Amos squinted at it. Wyatt leaned forward. "If you won't handle it, I will. But next time, I won't bring evidence. Just names." The sheriff looked over Wyatt's shoulder at Calla, who stood in the doorway, eyes fixed on him like judgment with a heartbeat. Amos sighed. "You've stirred up the town." "They stirred themselves," Wyatt said. "We just stopped kneeling." Outside, a few townsfolk had gathered. Women mostly. A few younger men. Watching. Calla didn't speak to them. But one woman, Mrs. Fenley, known for her sharp tongue and sweeter pies, stepped forward. "I heard what they did," she said. "And what you didn't let happen." Calla's lips parted. "We didn't come to fix the town." "You might have anyway," the woman replied. She handed Calla a folded cloth. Inside, bread. Still warm. Calla nodded once. took it like an oath. By the time they returned to the ranch, 3 more horses waited near the gate. Ivy froze. Mercy took a step back, but Wyatt raised a hand. It's all right. The women who'd gathered weren't carrying weapons. They held baskets, cloth, soap. One had a spool of thread. Another carried a bolt of soft cotton. Delilah opened the door. Junie clapped once, surprised. Looks like we're having company. The women didn't speak much. Just nodded. Left the gifts. Said things like, "Your roof leaks, we'll fix it," or, "That boy Levi, he cried when he heard what they tried to do." And then they left. Wyatt stood with his arms crossed, trying to pretend he didn't feel what he felt. But when Calla walked past, she whispered, "It's starting." He asked, "What is?" She looked toward the sign Ivy painted. Belonging. That night, the fire inside the house roared like it hadn't in years. Not just heat, but light. Junie danced barefoot again. Mercy fed Samuel bits of bread and didn't flinch when the bird cawed. But after dinner, as the wind howled and the moon rose, Wyatt stepped out alone. The ridge was quiet, but not empty. The same 3 riders were there. No fire this time. No words. Just shadows waiting. He didn't go back inside. Not yet. He stood at the fence line. One hand rested on the post Calla had driven into the earth herself. And he didn't move. Which city are you watching our video from? Please leave a comment. Please subscribe to the channel as well. Thank you.